Today, I want to talk about an interesting experiment that I did where I used soldering filters to extract plastic fumes from my 3D printer. But first, I want to talk about how I even got there in the first place and why I ran this experiment. So, a while back, I was reading an article. It probably wasn't this one, but it was something like this, where it was showing this one paper that was saying scientists can now remove nanoplastics from our water with 94% efficiency. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Let me read about this. So I was reading through it, and there's the part down here that I want to highlight is that I was going, oh, the researchers use activated carbon to treat water contaminated by nanoplastics. And I was like, oh, well, that's interesting because for people that aren't familiar with engineering and fluid dynamics, we treat air like water, and my mind's always on 3D printing, and I've always been a little concerned because the 3D printer is melting plastics, and it's generally considered to be non-toxic and safe, but I was like, well, what about nanoplastics? Is that something that's being generated by the printer? Probably. So I was thinking, well, if that's being generated and we're not really paying attention to it, is there a way that we can extract that? And I was thinking, and I was going, how could we do this? So first I looked through the paper a little bit more. So this is the paper right here, and these are the authors that wrote the paper. And I was going through, and since I don't want to buy it, I was just really looking at what I could look at, which would include this image right here. And I was like, all right, so it just needs to be activated carbon. They're basically making an activated carbon from this epoxy, basically turning waste into activated carbon to help clean water. So I was like, all right, so all I have to do is create activated carbon, and then I could probably filter out of the air. And I was like, could a HEPA filter do this? So I just did a quick search, and I was like, well, no, it doesn't look like that HEPA filters would be able to filter out nanoplastics and other ultrafine particles. So I was thinking about it, and I was like, oh, I've done soldering before. I think that's made out of activated carbon. Activated carbon is what I need. All right, these might work. So this is my 3D printing setup right here, and all I did is I took my little soldering exhaust fumes with my filters, and I set it up here, and I just let it go whenever I was printing. And mostly I've been printing with yellow, but I've also been printing with white and red recently. So this is what I was doing, and I initially ran this with just my normal print settings, which this isn't an extreme version. This is one I don't use, but usually I throw glue on the build plate. So when I first did this and I saw it, I was like, all right, well, maybe what I'm collecting is the fumes of the glue. And I was like, all right, so let's rule that out. I'm going to do a clean build plate and do all of my prints on this. So I actually had to dial in my settings for my 3D printer and add brims and things like that. But I've been printing this entire time on a super clean build plate. So it didn't have anything else on it. So all that it would be collecting would be the fumes from the 3D printer as it was set up right next to the 3D printer as shown here. So I let it run, and it slowly started collecting things. So for an example reference, this is the filter brand new out of the package, very dark. This is the filter pulled out, so you can see that there's this clear residue that's on the filter itself. And then I put it under my light stand, and you can see it even more clearly that there's this circular ring. It's funny, it's just that's the circle of the fan. So it's the circular ring of this milky white residue. And when we sort of zoom in and take a better picture with our phone camera, we see that, yes, it is a coating on it. So we can see here, like, there's this film. So that makes us think more and more that, yes, there is plastic that's been captured and coated on this activated carbon soldering fan. And then, yeah, right here, this is the one I wanted to highlight. So see this one, there's a black tip, and then there's this white coating with little pockets through. That's how you know that something is actually coating on it. So then the question is this coating the plastic from my 3D prints? So I pulled off some strands of this, threw it under my personal microscope. Wasn't very easy to get an image of this, but this is probably the best one I got. And when we're looking at it, we see, yes, there's these yellow plastics, there's these white plastics, there's these red plastics, and And I forgot that I also did blue. So we have blue plastics here as well. So we're seeing all across this different color plastics. So that this makes me think more and more that yes, what this did capture is indeed plastics from my 3D printing. So this is something that could be used during 3D printing to capture particles, nanoparticles that are just given off as exhaust through the natural heating process, because what you're doing, if I go back to my 3D printer real quick, is when the filament is fed through and loaded in, you have a hot end that is just going to basically melt the plastic in a very controlled way. And that hot end allows melting that plastic to make your part. Well, that's also releasing nanoparticle fumes and microplastic fumes. So nanoplastic and microplastic that can be captured. So this means that these are things that would also be given off and collecting on surfaces and stuff like that. So that makes me now want to have an enclosure. That's probably something I'm going to have to purchase in the near future or build myself. But yeah, this was a very interesting small scale study. So the next thing that I personally would do if I had the resources and the availability is I'd actually take these filters and I'd get them tested through spectroscopy to make sure that yes, this is plastic that I'm capturing, that it's not maybe some particulates from dust or things like that. I'm pretty confident this is indeed plastic because when we look at the this right here, this microscopic image, it just looks like plastic particles. So that makes me think, and also it's the different colors, the different filaments I've been using recently. So to me, it's very, very obvious. And then the fact that there is indeed a film coating. If it was dust, you wouldn't get this film coating on it. You just have embedded particles of dust. So I think pretty confidently that this did in fact work. So this is an interesting thing. I'd like to start incorporating basically these activated carbon soldering filters into my my enclosure that I'm going to build in the future. This is definitely something I want to do, but just interesting, something to think about, something to know.